Welcome to lesson 2. This is the one where we're going to talk about conducting our sales calls. When I first set out on my own, this was one of the most intimidating parts of being on my own. I didn't really think of myself as someone who could do sales. And back in my agency days, there was always a sales team providing me with clients. So I definitely had some nerves before my first solo sales call. With that in mind, I did want to share how I personally conduct my PPC sales calls in a way that allows me to actually enjoy them and be my authentic self, in the hopes that it will help you feel more prepared and confident when you start running your own sales calls. So, with that, let's get into it. I wanted to start this lesson with talking about the goals for sales calls. I think it's important to have some objectives in mind before you even hop on the call. My goals are pretty consistent for every sales call. I'm evaluating them as much as they are evaluating me. I want to make sure it will be a good relationship for both sides. I'm also trying to get in these calls a better understanding of their business and what success would look like if we were to work together. I want to clearly understand the expectations that they have of me, and then I can judge if I'm able to meet them effectively. And during the call, I also want to try to develop a relationship. I just think it makes everything easier. And because I want to start establishing that relationship, it's really important that I be authentic and show the real me. I've had instances in the past where I basically played a role on sales calls or during audits back in my agency days, and it was just really hard to keep that act going. I'd much rather be upfront and be myself so they know who they're working with, and I don't have to pretend to be somebody that I'm not. And then more tactically, I want to know their timing for getting started, because that's always kind of a dance of figuring out the right timing. But I also want to know budgets, channels, and any other information that I need when creating the scope of work. And next up, I wanted to cover a question that I get in a lot of my freelance coaching calls, which is, should I set up a pitch deck? My take is that I used to, and then I ditched it after my first couple of prospecting calls. And the main reason being is that it just felt too focused on me and not enough about the prospect. So oftentimes, I found that the prospect treats our discovery call almost like a mini therapy session. So I want to leave enough time for them to be able to talk. So with that, if I was trying to shoehorn in points from my pitch deck, it just wasn't fitting the way the conversation was going. So by ditching that and then just doing my prep ahead of time, I'm able to have more of a free flowing conversation. It feels more natural and I get more context to work with. So that's my take on it. If you want to create one so that you're just reinforcing to yourself your service offering, your positioning, and your pricing, I would say go with that, but keep it internal. Almost have that as a reference while you're on the call rather than making it the main focus of the call. So again, the prospecting call should be about the prospect, not necessarily about you. So bottom line with this one, I would rather have that free flowing conversation and learning more about the prospect and their business and their struggles than to force talking points about myself and my services. So just my 2 cents on that. All right, moving on to conducting the actual meeting. I recommend first showing up a few minutes early. I personally don't think it's a good look if the prospect is there before you. So just plan to show up like 3 minutes before the meeting time. Then I'll start with greetings. I'll let them know that I'm excited to meet them because I truly am. And then I'll ask what's going on / how I can help them. That's kind of how I segue into understanding the context, the problems that you're facing, and then learning more about their business. And then after that, I stop talking. So this is the time for them to talk and for me to listen. So usually when I ask, hey, like, what's going on? How can I help? Basically, why did you reach out to me? Then they just go and I stop talking and I let them run with it. And at this point, the prospect will usually answer all of my questions that I prepared, but I keep that Google Doc that I prepared for the meeting visible and I'm taking notes while the client is talking. I also recommend, and I put this in a slide a little bit further down, but if you have one of those AI note takers that you can invite to the meeting, that also helps. Just make sure that no important context slips through the cracks. So again, my goal is to keep it natural, make it feel like a conversation, and to get really valuable context about what they're looking for, and also to determine if I'm the best person for the job. And based on what they share, I'll start spitballing strategies and ideas. Nothing here is set in stone, but just based on the info that they've provided, I want to at least just throw out some ideas. It makes it more collaborative, it makes it more engaging, and they can also get a sense of the direction that I'll take their PPC strategy based on the context that they've shared. All right, so things to look for during the prospecting sales call. Number one is I'm gauging the client's attitude. I want to know how they view PPC, how they view freelancers, and I'm also looking for how seriously they take PPC and marketing in general. If they've gone through a ton of vendors and contractors and they're bad mouthing vendors and other agencies, that's a bit of a red flag for me. And additionally, if they just want quick campaigns and they aren't interested in long-term work and a long-term strategy, then quite frankly, they aren't for me. And then fourth, I'm also listening for whether they can effectively convert the traffic and the leads that I'm bringing them. This is less of a deal breaker and just more of an obstacle for me to keep in mind if we are to work together, that it'll probably be an ongoing topic of conversation, and it'll be something that I bring up in our future meetings and strategy calls. I'll directly ask about the quality of the leads and how they're converting. And lastly, if I pick up any red flags, it's an immediate no. Over the past decade, I've worked with so many clients. Some were terrible fits, others were awesome, but I've really been able to hone my intuition around what would make a quality client, a good client for me to work with. So I definitely listen to my intuition, and if there's any red flags, then it's a no-go for me. So in this case, how I deal with that, if I'm in a call with someone and I'm like, I don't think this is going to be a good fit, I'll just reiterate my services and my way of working. And basically, I'll almost disqualify myself. I'll basically say that I'm not a good fit for them, obviously in a polite and professional way. And then if I don't feel like that's really going to land, or if that's not going to serve me in the conversation, then I may also just say that I'm at capacity and I can't take on any new clients. All right, so moving on to wrapping up the meeting and next steps. So when we're nearing the end of the meeting, I'll say, obviously, whether or not I think I can help them. Most of the time, they're a good fit and I think I can. Don't be afraid to be upfront, though, if your services don't make sense. I've seen some instances where folks think they need PPC, but either they don't understand what PPC is, or they're not actually at a point in the maturity of their business where PPC would make sense. And so again, don't be afraid to be upfront if either your services don't make sense for them at all, or if your services don't make sense at this current time in their business. I would say that this is a major differentiator between freelancers, even between agencies. If you can almost say, hey, love to work with you, but quite honestly, I don't want to waste your money, or I don't think you're there yet. That's a huge trust builder. And what's interesting is that I've also seen this result in a lot of referrals from those prospects that I couldn't help. But because I was so helpful and really honest with them, they were keen to refer business to me. So again, just because the current opportunity that you're faced with may not be the right fit either for you or for them, it doesn't mean that it won't result in something beneficial down the road. So just keep that in mind. But then if they are a good fit, I'll reiterate the high level points about my services, and then I'll tell them that I'll send over my scope of work. And my scope of work is essentially a menu of service options. I even tell them that when I'm on the call. So the main option is PPC management, because that's most likely what they need. It's what they know me for. But I also have some add-on services like landing page builds and organic LinkedIn content creation. So I'll mention this on the call as like, oh, by the way, if you're interested, I also do this. But most of the time, they just go with option one, PPC management. And I also wanted to share some additional meeting tips. So these really helped me when I was getting started with running my own sales calls. And I mentioned this earlier, but I've really found that AI meeting note takers can really help a lot, especially for capturing information that maybe slipped through the cracks. I personally have one through Calendly that just automatically invites itself to my Zoom calls. And what's cool is that it will also record the meeting as well. So if I wanted to go back and watch it to make sure that I didn't miss any crucial information, I'm able to do that. But at this point, most video conferencing platforms have them, but there's also places like Otter, Fireflies, and others that also provide that note taker. My next tip is that if you've got a messy space where you're conducting your meeting, just blur your background. I found that sometimes my office is a little bit on the messy side, so if that's the case, then I'll just blur my background when we're on a video call. Next, put on a nice shirt, smile, and if you're nervous, just remember that they are excited to meet you. They reached out to you. They are interested in how you can help them. All right, now moving into prospect call follow-up. So after the call, if they're a good fit, I'll immediately follow up over email. So I put an example of my follow-up and then the immediate response. So this one was actually moving pretty quick. So with that, I'll attach my standard scope of work that I customize slightly based on our conversation. And my goal is to make this as easy as possible. I offer straightforward services, straightforward ways to work together. And then, like I said, in this example, the prospect was ready to go immediately. All right, so let's go over my standard scope of work template. This is in the course resources section and it's customizable, but you have to make a copy in order to make your edits to it. I limited this template specifically to my PPC management service since that's the most applicable for this course. But like I mentioned earlier, I also offer landing page builds and organic LinkedIn content creation / strategy. So that's why in the template, PPC is item 1, because I also have items 2 and 3. So just wanted to provide some background there. What you'll see here, like I said, item 1, full service PPC management. I'll put the pricing right up top, and then what's included is all of this outlined right here. And this is a really good base for me to start with. Most of the time, I'm able to just take this and immediately just like update the pricing and then ship out to the prospect. But I do like to go through and just make sure that all of the bullet points make sense based on our conversations, especially when it comes to channels. So they may just be looking for Google ads or they may just be looking for LinkedIn ads. So I want my scope to accurately reflect what we talked about and what they're interested in. This is a really good foundation for you to build off of too if you're sending out a scope of work. So wanted to make sure I highlighted that in this lesson here. And again, you can access this in the course resources section. Just be sure to make a copy so that you can customize it and put your own branding in the heading so you're not just stuck with mine. And one thing I wanted to touch on before we wrap up this lesson is, what if a prospect doesn't want to move forward? This can be either very obvious, where they say they'll be going with another vendor, or they're not ready to get started, or they'll basically tell you that they're not going to work with you. But what I found to be more common is a more subtle way where they just don't respond to your follow-ups. So they essentially ghost you. Just know that that is totally normal. You will not win every deal. My recommendation is to try to not take this personally. And I know that's easier said than done, but don't spend all your time thinking about the deals you didn't close. You can't really control that. I recommend trying to move on as quickly as possible and putting more time into things you can control, like your content, networking, and then really fostering and growing the relationships with your current clients if you have those. So again, the more you put yourself out there, the more meetings you'll have and the more opportunities you'll have to close deals. So if I don't hear back from my initial follow-up after a few days, I'll reach out and ask if they have any questions about the scope. And then from there, I'll give it a week before following up for a last time. And if I still don't hear anything, then I'll just drop it. So just know that this is totally normal. Yes, it's a bummer. Yes, it sucks. Just know that it happens to everybody, but just focus your energy on what you can control and the things that are likely to bring you more better fit opportunities in the future. All right, wrapping up this lesson. Just remember that discovery calls are just conversations. And because you've given them all of the information about your services and your pricing, these tend to be much warmer conversations than what you might think of with like a typical cold sales call. And my third point here is just to give your prospect the center stage and room to give you all of the context about what's important to them. This is really key for ensuring that your work is in lockstep with what's valuable to them and what their expectations are. And I've actually found that these calls usually go by pretty fast if they're a good fit. And then if it's a good fit conversation, they typically want to get started soon, which is really nice. With that, we will roll on to our next lesson, which is all about post call scope kickoff, say that 10 times fast, after a prospect signs. So, with that, I will see you over there.